Well, Matt, we're here. It's August 7th, 2022, and exactly 30 years ago today, Unforgiven was released.
Wow, that's my favorite Ken Watanabe movie.
Welcome to Deep Focus. I'm Nate,
And I'm Matt.
and I'm wearing a cowboy hat in honor of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, one of his many classic westerns, but probably by most accounts his best western, maybe
Yeah.
best movie. This is a film that I recall seeing the trailer for it in the theaters back in the summer of 1992. I had gone to see Batman Returns with my family, and that was released, I think, in June of that summer. And then there's this trailer for some movie coming out in 1992, and I remember that trailer really intriguing me.
In a time when lawmen were killers,
What are y'all looking at? You English, Bob?
outlaws were heroes.
Well, I thought that you were dead.
Hell, I even thought I was dead.
But my parents not letting me go see the movie.
Did they go see it?
I don't know if they saw it in the theater. They did see it because they really loved it. And then I saw it actually first time ever on TV when it made its TV premiere a couple years later. And it's obviously very much an adult's film.
Yeah.
But right away, even as a kid, when I saw it, I recognized that I was watching something very special. I couldn't possibly, at that age, I was probably like 12 when I first saw it. I don't think that I really fully grasped just how much there is to this film. And it's a film that I really loved ever since then. And actually, I texted you sometime in the last few months saying that it had finally cracked it. It had made my top 10 films of all time. It had always been
That's
kind
right.
of flirting on the outside of it, but no. And I watched it on 4K. I think maybe just seeing it appreciating the cinematography anew with that greater resolution finally kind of tipped it into the top 10 of all time for me. So this is one of those films that it'll be hard for me not to gush about everything about it.
Yeah, you're definitely a bigger fan of this film than I am. I mean, I like this film a lot. I think it's a great Western, and you could say that it's Eastwood's best film. And it's very much the anti-Western in many ways, right? This is kind of a meditation on the idea of the gunslinger and the real moral consequences of a life like that. So, of course, Clint Eastwood very famously became famous because of films like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More. And I think this film is really meant to be a look back on his own career in a very specific way, but also to really explore the morality of that kind of lifestyle. And it's really about a man that's changed his life, and he's forced to go back to the life he left behind in a very dark and violent way.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. As you know, I'm a big fan of genre in general, and the Western genre in particular has always been one that I've really loved, whether it's the classic Westerns, the spaghetti Westerns, the more modern Westerns, the modern day Westerns, like something like No Country for Old Men. And then there's these questions about, anti-Westerns or revisionist Westerns, right? And where does Unforgiven fit in that overall conversation is a fascinating one because it has elements of the classical Western. It has elements of the anti-Western. And it's really, to me, I think, probably the perfect example of the Western genre in capturing some of the complexities of it. And at the same time, not being kind of a postmodernist film. I mean, there's nothing postmodern here. It's very much clearly has a concept of there is truth, there is righteousness, there is wrongness.
I mean, if you was mad at them, well, I mean, if they done you some wrong, I could see shooting them.
We done stuff for money before, Ned.
Yeah. We thought we did.
But it also is not so simplistic as to be that the good guy wears the white hat, the black guy wears the black hat, and the law is good and the outlaw is not. Really, this is a film that I think fundamentally is convinced that all of the characters in it are wrong, right, in some capacity, in some way. It's a very lean story. David Webb Peoples, who's not a very prolific writer, but has pretty much written nothing but excellent things.
Blade Runner.
Yes, he was a
Yeah.
co-writer on Blade Runner. He also wrote this same year the movie Hero with Dustin Hoffman came out, which sadly doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's one of the better looks and critiques of the media. Very, very kind of screwball era throwback in many ways. A wonderful little film, but came out the same year as this. But here, I think this film, which he had written in the 70s under the title "The Cut Whore Killings," which can see why that didn't make it to the release.
Understandable.
But it's a film that really feels like it was from the 70s. Eastwood was given it in the early 80s and chose to wait on it because he felt he needed to do other things first before he could really come back to this material. So I think Eastwood understood he needed to have some perspective to work with the script that had been given to him, right? And it shows. I think the fact that we have in this film a history with Eastwood as an actor, and at this point as a director, because he's writer, director, and he's actor, director, and producer on this film.
Yep.
You gain from him in this film with the experience you've had from Rawhide to The Outlaw Josie Wales to Pale Rider to now this, right? You can see the maturation of a man in this, and this very lean story has, I think, incredible thematic profundity to it, and it's captured very well in the filmmaking, the acting, and the storytelling.
Yeah, the moral ambiguity is interesting. And maybe that's the wrong phrase, but just the idea that every character in this film, has a dark side, is sinning in a way, if you want to use that term, and there really is no distinct hero in this picture. I mean, obviously, Eastwood's character William Money is the protagonist, and we follow him throughout, and we're introduced to him. He's living a very modest life.
Pig farmer. Clearly not good at it.
Yeah, just out of his element, right? And it's implied that he's lost his wife fairly recently, and he's really left to take care of two very small children on his own. And he gets a visit from this young man who offers him a job.
How about being my partner? I'm heading up north in through Newbraska up to Wyoming. Gonna kill a couple of no-good cowboys.
For what?
For cutting up a lady.
And he sees this as an opportunity to give his family a better life. He knows that he's good at this line of work. He has a reputation. That's why this young man is visiting him in the first place. And he ultimately decides to pursue the contract.
Well, so yeah, it's a very simple setup, and it's he goes on this journey, enlists his old partner Ned, played by Morgan Freeman,
Yeah.
As they're going to make their way to Big Whiskey, Wyoming, where Gene Hackman is the towering character of Little Bill Daggett, right, the sheriff of that particular town. But just the whole question about the Western, and the ambiguity this film raises. It's interesting in that, a lot of Westerns, you think of a lot of John Ford Westerns, right? That many of which are excellent, and even something as perhaps morally ambiguous as The Searchers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which raises questions about racism and questions about heroism. It still, nonetheless, is, for example, in pursuit of young girls who are chaste, right? Here, the inciting incident is a woman being brutally knifed and cut up by cowboys who's a prostitute, right? So your heroes, so to speak, at least you should say the protagonists, because I don't think there exactly are any heroes in this film. I think that's part of its point. But the protagonists go into action not to defend the honor of a noble, heroic woman, but of a prostitute, right? And that's, again, getting into this very difficult, dark situation. And the way everything is set up is, in many ways, to show that this young woman, played very well by Anna Thompson, who plays Delilah, the cut prostitute, is constantly being really denied any of her own action. I mean, she varies a very small character, right? And even among the prostitutes, she's not the lead, right? The lead is Strawberry Alice, played by Frances Fisher, who really is the one that wants the revenge.
You ain't even gonna whip them?
Well, I find them instead, Alice.
For what they done? Skinny, get some ponies, and that's it? That ain't fair, little Bill. That ain't fair.
These two cowboys that are brought to justice, so to speak, really you question, like, well, what is the real just thing to do with them? I mean, even little Bill has his own proposal of how to handle justice, right?
You did the cutting. Come to the thaw, you bring in 5 ponies and you give them over to Skinny here.
5.
And you bring in 2. You give them over, you hear?
Yes, sir.
Basically views this as a property crime. And you can then see that, you know, the one young one who doesn't actually do the cutting, but was there in the brothel, tries to make some sort of amend, and it's even denied, not by Delilah herself, but by the others. They refused the act of consideration for her, right? Which I would think, you know, being a prostitute, getting a horse that she could sell or do whatever with would be quite good for her. And they don't even allow her to possibly have that, right? So the film, in many ways, is looking at social structures as much as it is looking at the individual characters. And I think fundamentally it's a question about, it really gets to the heart of what is civilization, how do you have to build a civilization. Little Bill, you know, I remember a lot of the reviews at the time talked about him being sadistic, and I think that's a fundamental misreading of the character as written and as played. Gene Hackman's fantastic in this.
He's amazing. I mean, he's one of my favorite actors, always has been, and he has a real kind of conundrum in this film in many ways, right? I mean, he's responsible for maintaining order, and he doesn't want his town to be overrun by a bunch of bounty hunters.
You could run off them 2 cowboys.
I could run off them whores.
So how does he maintain that order? Well, that's where his actions start to become questionable, right? I mean, in a way, what he's trying to do is virtuous, to maintain peace and law and order, but the way he goes about it is concerning. And yeah, to just...
It's concerning to you and me in the 21st century,
Well,
but is it concerning in that context, right?
That's another thing I wanted to point out, is this film really does take the time to show people's interpretation of events as they would have interpreted them during that period, right? So you mentioned this idea of, you know, harming a prostitute equating that to harming property of some kind. I mean, that's a pretty despicable notion, right? But at the time, that may have been something that was commonly thought. And the film, yeah, it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't have really a modern lens. I mean, I really think it's quite honest with the time period and how these situations would have played out. It's definitely one of its strengths.
Yeah, and that comes a lot from the script, I think. The dialogue is very much authentic. I mean, he did a lot of research to look into the writings and the different evidence he could find of how people spoke in this era.
It almost comes across as too simplistic sometimes, but it does make sense. I mean, I think it feels accurate, ultimately.
Yeah, and even in the simplicity, there are some truly profound things, particularly in the later part of the movie, right? You know, the story progresses very slowly at first. I mean, it takes a while before it really gets going anywhere. But even then, it's establishing atmosphere, it's establishing character, so that when it finally does kind of really come to a head in the final act, the resonance of the film is going to mean all the more to you.
I think how this film treats violence is something we should definitely talk about too, and it's not a Hollywood Western in that sense, right? It's not bang bang, someone falls down and they're dead instantly. It's a very messy, kind of painful, drawn out process, you know, the idea of a gunfight. And when that trio tracks down the cowboys kind of in that ravine, and they end up killing the first cowboy, it's such a painful scene, right? I mean, it's so prolonged, and you know, initially he's injured by a horse falling on his leg, and he's broken his leg, and then so when Ned decides that he can't shoot him, William takes the rifle and ends up shooting him through the stomach, essentially. And just how drawn out that whole sequence is, and yelling down there to give him water.
I'm bleeding, Slim. Give me some water, please.
Give him a drink of water, God damn it.
Give me a drink of water, would you, Slim?
Will you give him a drink of water, for Christ's sake? We ain't gonna shoot.
There's no glory in it at all, right?
Right.
It's completely robbed of any sense of victory. And I love how this film really takes the time to depict the agony of taking a life.
I think that particular scene you highlight is worth really reflecting upon in terms of how it was staged. And this is really, I think, a highlight to Clint Eastwood as a director. There's a few things he's doing in that scene that are really quite important and quite subtle. It's a very subtle work that he does. And one of the things he does is he obviously establishes it at great distance. So they're up in the top behind cover, so they're really not in any danger from these guys. They snipe him, miss the shot, so it's not a clean kill. Then they have to deal with the sound of the agony and the traveling, and the way the film really captures through the editing, through the sound design, the sense of distance there, and him just agonizingly trying to get out of range, right, is really, really suspenseful and horrifying as you're watching it.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful shot in there where after he's not dead, I mean, he's just bleeding out, but they know they've killed him, right? I mean, Will saying, yeah, we've killed him. And the Schofield kid's totally oblivious to any of this because he obviously is, one, blind.
Yeah,
we learned that we learned that he can't see, which has a great thematic resonance because he really can't see what's coming, right? He can't see what a life of being a violent criminal is, right?
Yeah, he doesn't understand what he's getting into.
Exactly. So it's a beautiful symbol that's there. But also in this scene, he's clearly ambivalent to what's happening with Ned, what's happening with Will, what's going on in the fact that a man is dying. Ned, there's this wonderful shot with all three of them in the frame. Ned is framed in the lower left-hand corner of the shot, just totally broken down. And one of the great things in Jack Green's cinematography is how he frames shots. There's a lot of claustrophobia in the framing. Mm-hmm. It's very tight, I mean, there's some of the panoramic shots, the things you think about with that Western, but particularly in Big Whiskey, particularly in some of their own settings where they kind of have to set up camp, everything gets really cramped. It's the plains, it should be thought of as wide open, but he captures that real claustrophobia that I think violence would create for a community. Big Whiskey, as a town, is dealing with violence, and Little Bill is in many ways, trying to establish some sense of civic order. That's where I can't quite see him as the villain. He does things that we object to, right? But he's certainly no more villainous than anybody else, right? In many ways, I'd say he's less villainous because he doesn't immediately always go to, let me just beat people, right? He does take that approach with English Bob because he wants to establish, don't anybody else come here.
Well, and he has a history with English Bob, too.
Right.
And a lot of people, I think, criticize this film, well, because of that sequence, because it seems like such a throwaway part of the film. English Bob shows up and then gets beaten up, thrown in jail, and banished, and we never see him again. But it's a brilliant little sequence, and it really does establish...
I think the film suffers greatly without it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite parts of the film, actually, because it's just such a compelling piece of filmmaking, especially that confrontation with Little Bill.
Well, I guess that means you boys can read. So I guess that means that you saw the signs outside of town there saying, surrender your firearms?
You learn so much about Little Bill's character through that sequence, and I think that's why it's there, ultimately. And you know that him and English Bob have a history, and that history not only informs what happens between the two of them, but informs what happens later in the film in terms of the decisions that Little Bill makes. I mean, you get the sense that this is someone he's an experienced lawman. He's probably been through many life and death situations and somehow survived and gotten to this point, and probably didn't do so by being charitable, right? So he's sort of cultivated this persona, but also an awareness that he needs to be brutal in this world, in this environment, to maintain the type of order he's trying to maintain.
And the whole confrontation with Little Bill and English Bob is great for a couple of things. And it does do something important for the narrative. Obviously, it does reveal some of us about who Little Bill is. And it does provide, by the way, just a great performance from Richard Harris.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
A little detail, I don't know if you've ever picked up on this, but he's always speaking and pontificating.
I don't wish to give offense when I observe that the French are known to be a race of assassins, though they can't shoot worth a damn. Any Frenchmen in the present company are excluded, of course.
He's completely full of shit,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's the whole point. He's not a real killer. He's not the real threat.
Well, he travels around with his PR agent.
Right, but after he's beaten and he's had the throw in jail, everything like that, when he's leaving, did you notice that Richard Harris switches it to a Cockney accent?
Plague on you! Plague on the whole stinking lot of you! Without morals or laws!
Now that you mention it, I guess, yeah,
it's a
the
small
refined
detail.
accent isn't there anymore.
Yeah, it's a small little detail. So it's like he's been stripped of all the pretense, right? It's a really cool little acting choice he made there.
You're a lot of savages, that's what you all are! A bunch of bloody savages! A curse on you!
The other thing that sequence does, even though English Bob doesn't ever meet our main protagonists, it does introduce Mr. Beauchamp, right? Saul Rubinek plays this biographer for English Bob, who is clearly the guy looking to create the myth of the West.
Yeah,
right?
he's like the pulp novelist, essentially.
Right, the Duck of Death.
The Duck of Death.
The Duke.
The Duke, Bill.
Yeah.
And he has that encounter with Little Bill. He gets arrested too. And it's beautiful because it does flesh out an important thematic point about both Will Money and Little Bill, which, by the way, I've never heard anybody comment on this, but it seems so obvious to me. They both, Will Money and Little Bill, have the same name. It's William.
That's true.
Right? And I've never heard anybody make point of that, but it's, I think, a very important and purposeful choice that they both have the same name, that they're very similar characters. Mm-hmm. But where I see the real difference, it isn't necessarily that one's vicious and one isn't, one's sadistic, one isn't. They're very similar in all of those qualities. It comes down to how they respond to this Beauchamp character. Beauchamp, as the myth maker, right, wants to find the story that's the romantic gunslinger, and he creates the fiction. He buys into the lies of English Bob. Then he starts talking to Little Bill, who's giving him, like, let me give you the real thing, you know. Yeah. That beautiful, wonderful scene that plays out in the jail cell is probably my favorite scene in the whole film. Because Little Bill is, in many ways, doing the deconstructing in that.
I was in the Blue Bottle Saloon in Wichita the night that English Bob killed Corky Corcoran. I didn't see you there. No woman, no two-gun shooters.
But also he wants to become a hero too, right? He's talking to the writer so that he can become...
It's an ego thing.
A hero, right?
Yeah,
He can have, let me tell you what the West is. When Will Money comes into Mr. Beauchamp, he just doesn't care, and he just sends him away. And, you know, he even threatens him, basically. He's given Beauchamp the mythic story, the huge story, but he doesn't tell him anything about it. He doesn't answer any of his questions.
And so, who was next? It was Clyde, right? He must have killed Clyde. Well, it could have been Deputy Andy, wasn't he? Or
all I can tell you is who's going to be last.
He just sends him away.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is one of the most interesting things thematically in this film, is the fact that Will Money is a different kind of animal than everybody else, and really, truly is, at the heart of it, disinterested in the West itself.
Well, Money is the brutal killer in the purest sense in this picture, right? I mean, he's, at the end, he really clicks back into the mode that he was in as a young man. And it's, in his mind, it's just out of necessity that, okay, I need to do this. And it's such a subtle transformation. I love how...
Yeah, it's built. It's not just we need to do this. It's built throughout the movie.
Well, and it's the scene out by the tree with the Schofield kid, which is just probably my favorite scene in the whole film, actually, their conversation. Mm-hmm. And the kid really taking in what it means to take a life.
I shot that fucker 3 times. He's taking a shit, and he went for his pistol, and I blazed away. First shot, I got him right in the chest.
Whereas, you know, William Money has a much deeper understanding, clearly. You know, it's funny, throughout the film, he's always mentioning, well, I don't really remember that because I was drunk. And he says that probably half a dozen times, but you know he remembers, you know. I mean, you have to remember enough to know that you don't want to live that way anymore. And his wife, his late wife, brought him away from that life and kind of converted him, so to speak. But the fact that he takes the liquor bottle and takes a sip from it as he's hearing about what happened to Ned, it's such a subtle moment that can go by completely unnoticed. But up until that point, he hasn't touched alcohol, right? And it's made a point several times throughout the film that he doesn't drink anymore. But it's kind of a medium shot, and he just takes the bottle and takes...
It's actually out of frame that he picks it. You can see the gesture, but the actual taking of it's out of frame.
Yeah, and just takes a sip, and you just know, if you notice that, this is the moment where he's like, okay, I need to go back to those ways to really resolve the situation. And there's a sense of resignation and sadness and grief to that moment, clearly, that he has to... And you could say that he doesn't have to go back to that, right? I mean, this is a choice that he's making, and just how the film doesn't make that into some grand swell of music, and you know, just the way it's treated is brilliant, I think.
Well, I think, you know, they even are planting seeds before that moment, showing Will is lapsing into who he will be in that final scene there, right? Because you see, you know, the initial part, you know, I'm not like that. He keeps repeating this, I'm not like that anymore.
She knew me back then. She knew what a no good son of a bitch I was. She just ain't allowing that I've changed. She don't realize I ain't like that no more.
I think that's fundamentally a lie he keeps telling himself. I think deep down, Will has ultimately always considered himself to be a killer.
Yeah.
And that's his identity of himself. There's the myth making around him. I mean, everybody keeps talking about, you're the meanest son of a bitch I've ever seen. You hear all these stories about Will. We don't ever really see them. You know, there's even some dispute about the details on a couple of them. You know,
When he was talking back there about the time them deputies had the drop on you and Pete.
Yeah?
Well, I remember there was 3 men you shot, Will, not 2.
Well, I ain't like that no more, Ned.
it's like we don't really know who this man is. We hear he's the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
We don't know it, but you're seeing all of a sudden at different points in time it does come back. When he keeps trying to get on the horse, eventually there's the time when he just curses and is horribly, you know, angry towards that horse, right? And you see, oh, there's a flash of it there, right?
Yeah, sure.
It bubbles up. When Ned's going to leave because he can't continue on with killing the second cowboy, the kid's doing the whole, well, you're going to lose your share, and he just cuts him off. Shut up, right? And even the way he talks about the Schofield kid, like saying he's full of shit, right? You see him moving back into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's not fully there yet, but when he makes that choice to take the liquor, yeah, he's made the choice, I'm going back into my full former self. And I think that gets at part of the title, Unforgiven. Is Will Money really, truly ever not the killer? Has he ever really been truly freed from his sin, so to speak? I'm not sure that the film says that he ever was truly repentant, that he truly was a man who had not been like that. Maybe he was. Maybe he really had turned away from that and had embraced a different life. We don't know. And I think that's part of what is wonderful about this work, is that it shows the depth of a person and the depth of the consequences of violence in a way that few works of art maybe ever have. I mean, I'm thinking it really does belong up there in consideration of things like Macbeth, in terms of how it shows the consequences of evil in a person and what it does to a person. It really, I think, hits that level of profundity.
Yeah. But it really challenges the audience, too. I mean, again, going back to that moment where he just decides to kind of go back in his own mode, obviously he's planning on killing people, and obviously that's an evil thing. The other side of that, too, is you could say, well, he knows that he's going to be hunted probably indefinitely, potentially indefinitely, and his children may be threatened. because of his actions, so maybe he has to do this to protect his family.
Yeah, but
that might be a stretch.
I don't think that's even really what's motivating it, right? Because
Well, ultimately, no, but
yeah.
but you could spin it that way, right? And you could, and I think the film allows the room to really challenge the audience to say, or to ask them, yeah, what is good and evil in this situation? What's the right decision? What's the wrong decision? Ultimately, he decides to go back into town and essentially commit murders, right? And it culminates in that scene at the end, which is a very powerful scene. And I think a lot of people probably look at that scene as kind of a rah-rah sort of victorious.
Yeah, they're missing the point.
Absolutely. Yeah. But if you feel that way watching that, then you need to really step back, I think, and just understand the whole context of this picture, because it's such a heartbreaking moment for me anyway when I watched that sequence, not only because of Elias' loss, but you just understand that here's a man that probably in a sense lost his soul, regained it, and now he's choosing to lose it again, at least in this moment, right? But the film, I think, does have clarity about, as you said, there is right, there is wrong, there is truth, and it's not a moral relativist picture by any means.
Right. Well, in that final battle, that gunfight is truly exhilarating filmmaking. I mean, it's very classic. The dark streets, the rain pouring, the thunder, right? All those things are there. All those elements that you think of for that kind of a scene are there. But the first thing he does is he kills an unarmed man, right?
Well, sir, you are a cowardly son of a bitch. You just shot an unarmed man.
Well, he should have armed himself. He's going to decorate his saloon with my friend.
And he explains why, right? But Little Bill is correct. Like, that is a cowardly thing to do. And the speeches he and Little Bill give, right, are really quite great. As a matter of fact, that final battle scene, that gun battle, is perfect proof of what Little Bill had been saying before, which is if you keep your head cool, you're going to win.
Yeah, it's the personification of that.
Yeah. You look at how it's very claustrophobic. It's very tight quarters, so there's not a lot of choreography. That misfire that happens throws everybody off. He's able to kill Little Bill, or at least injure him, because we obviously know that he doesn't kill him right with that first shot, but he takes him out of the fight anyway with that first shot. But you notice how, what Will's doing is he's being calm and patient, right? He crouches where everybody else stays standing up. So he makes his target smaller, right? He turns to the other guys, the other deputies that are firing. Well, they're just shooting indiscriminately, which is exactly what Little Bill had said earlier is not supposed to do, right? So there's these inexperienced people who really just don't know anything, and Will Money kills 5 people really because they were just too scared. There's no reason he shouldn't have been killed, right? And I think the film makes that point. It's just people's fear that allowed him to come in there and do that. It's him rocking out. He could have been killed in the street, but he makes his little thing, his little tirade about how he would kill anybody that comes after him.
Any son of a bitch takes a shot at me, not only gonna kill him, I'm gonna kill his wife, all his friends, burn his damn house down.
They kind of believe him, and so they just don't stop him, right?
Yeah.
And I think that final battle really is quite profound, especially when it comes to that exchange with Little Bill and Will Money.
I don't deserve this. To die like this. I was building a house.
Deserves got nothing to do with it.
Where Will says, deserves got nothing to do with it. And I think that line is really well written and well delivered by Eastwood, because it tells you he's not ultimately himself interested in justice. And he didn't go to kill these cowboys because of justice. He wasn't thinking like, I need to dish out what's deserved to people.
He did it for money.
He's doing this for money, so that's obviously vicious and terrible, right? He kills Little Bill, not because Little Bill's bad or deserved it or was a bad sheriff. It's just because you killed my friend, now I kill you, right? And so he is fundamentally a bad man, and the film never hides away from that.
We should probably go back to the scene I mentioned, which is really my favorite scene of the film, between William Money Schofield Kid, just talking about the nature of murder and killing, and hell of a thing killing a man.
How he's dead. And the other one, too. All on account of pulling a trigger.
It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have.
You understand that William Money has a very deep understanding of what that means, and Schofield Kid is just learning it in this moment. And he's not even beginning to process it quite yet. I mean, he's almost in shock more than anything at that time, and you get the sense that, okay, he's not cut out for this kind of life, and that's pretty much all he knows at this moment, right? And whether you could say that he's overcome by nerves or anxiety, you don't get the sense that he's truly understanding on a deep level quite yet what's occurred. It's starting to seep in, I guess.
That one line, I mean, you said that it's very simplistic, you know, and I mean, I think the dialogue, it is simple, but it's also very believable, right? I mean, that line, "It's a hell of a thing killing a man," is what a character like Will Money would say, you know, and it also is just so profoundly true. I don't know if I've ever heard in all the other different kind of very erudite dialogue that's been written about murder or violence, you know, anything maybe that quite hits as honestly and accurately of what it means to kill a person, right? And you know, you could even argue, you know, that maybe it's even more profound not to say anything, but just to simply show it. But like you say, the Schofield Kid is processing, and Will Money's kind of just there waiting. I mean, I'm sure Will Money wouldn't have said it other than the fact that there's this kid breaking down in front of him.
Yeah.
And so he says it, and he says it so matter-of-factly. This is, you know, I think Clint Eastwood's performance here is really quite good. Maybe his best performance as an actor. And he captures the kind of Gary Cooper quality, you know, that sort of stoicism that you think of with the Western hero, but he captures it with world weariness, right? I mean, this is just a guy who understands what this is and speaks profound truth in that moment without maybe himself even understanding. I mean, he understands it because he's lived it, but not like he understands it as like an intellectual.
Yeah, he's not like a philosophical kind of guy, ultimately, even if he's imparting wisdom through what he's saying. That doesn't seem to be his intent.
So I guess, you know, the highest praise you can give a film is, I think, to say that it achieves its goals 100%. And this is a film, I think, that achieves every single goal it sets out to achieve. And realistically, I could never imagine it ever being done better.